Okay, if you're not looking at your profit and loss like this, I suspect you're leaving money on the table. So in this video, I'm going to talk you through how to format your profit and loss, how to look at your profit and loss like a true expert to help you understand what's happening in your business, to help you get more profitable, to understand when you're out of balance, to do trend analysis, and to actually give you a deeper connection to the numbers in your business. So if that's something you're interested in, if you're a Xero user, this will be super interesting to you because I'm going to show you the basics of why we're formatting the profit and loss like this. And then in the second section of the video, we're going to actually dive into the demo company in Xero. I'll walk you through step by step how to change the settings and create a custom report in Xero so you can have it at home. You can look at this every month for your business. So here's the basics. The goal for your profit and loss, and I suspect most clients aren't doing this when they onboarded with me. They're looking at just the standard P&L. They might be looking at the revenue. They might be looking at the profit, but they've got no idea of what's truly happening in their business. So for every new client I get, this is what I do. I create a custom report and I simplify their numbers so their brain can understand what's happening in the business. I also use common sizing to help them stay in balance and give them a rough budget for when they're out of balance in certain areas. And then we look at the P&L over time to give them trend analysis. So to give you a real practical example, here on the left is a pretty simple P&L, right? Revenue, cost of goods sold, which is, your direct costs, anything directly related to producing your services or your goods, like contractors or, for e-com, there might be like the raw costs of getting the product, gives you your gross margin. A key component of what I do is separate out all of the direct labor in the business. So that's all the team, that's all the headcount. And we put that in a separate bucket underneath growth margin, which is a critical difference to most people's P&L. And we have a look at what their labor costs as a percent of revenue are costing them. And then after that, we have the rest of the operating expenses. We've got advertising and marketing costs is one bucket. And this is a core component of simplifying the numbers. So instead of looking at a big overwhelming P&L, so if I show you like what a P&L looks like just straight out of Xero, if we go, this is the demo company, of course, I would never show you, live client data. If we go to accounting, we go to profit and loss, stock standard, you can see how overwhelming it is to look at all these numbers over time. All it gives you is this month, and it gives you every single operating expense you've got here listed. So if you've got a lot more operating expenses going through, it would have a huge amount. But looking at that tells me nothing. I don't know if that's in balance or out of balance, and there's too many things to look at. So what we do is simplify it down to just these key buckets: direct labor, advertising and marketing, facilities, which is anything to do with, rent, electricity, printers, things to do with your facilities, your office, and then everything else gets bucketed into other operating expenses. And then that gives us our total operating expenses overall. And then underneath that is our net profit margin. And you can see here, we can then start to apply common sizing here on the right. So we know obviously revenue is the top of the P&L. We can have a look at cost of sales or cost of goods sold and understand if that's in balance or out of balance. It's 15% of revenue. We can have a look at direct labor and check how that's going as a percent of revenue. Ideally not above 50% for agencies. For product businesses might be a little bit lower, of course. The rest of the operating expenses or overheads, which if I just expand this out, there you go, the common sizing here. 20%, ideally that shouldn't take up more than 20% of revenue, gives us the net profit at 20%. So it's kind of after everything, all the revenue comes in, COGS gets taken out, team costs get taken out, all the other overhead gets taken out, and hopefully we've got some net profit left over. So that's the theory. Now let's dive into doing it in Xero so you can create your own custom P&L that you can use for your business right away. And just to show you that I live and breathe this, here is an example dashboard for one of my fractional CFO clients. You can see the top left, the most important monthly graph. We've got the dashboard up here, but the top left, monthly trends, is exactly this. We're looking at gross margin, we're looking at direct labor, we're looking at overhead, we're looking at our net operating income or loss. All of those things are formatted like that on the P&L, so we can graph things out like that. So that's really important. It's a key pillar of looking at a P&L, and you can see we're graphing it out over time. And once you've done this in Xero yourself, you can export it to Google Sheets and run this exact same graph to see what's happening in the business. Like, hey, why is direct labor gone up from 278K to 325K? What's happening there? What's the story? And you can really start to understand what's happening in your business. So what I'm going to do now, and for an example of that is here. This is one of a forecast moving forward in time, but the same thing. We can plan the future. We can have a look at what our team costs are going to be because we're separating out direct labor, separating out overhead, and making sure we've got enough margin here. So this is net profit instead of operating profit, but same diff. You get it. Another way to look at it, this is for like bigger planning stuff to plan out our growth to be a $5 million business, what that looks like, and we can kind of put those numbers in and imagine that P&L growing over time. So you can play with the time scales. You look at this year versus last year, this quarter versus last quarter, all that kind of stuff. But I think the most powerful for you and what we're going to build is just the monthly analysis here. So without further ado, let's dive into creating this custom P&L for you in Xero so you can use it today. We've run the P&L and it just spits it out as this month, August, compare with none. So for a lot of my clients, when I create this custom one for them, I will still keep it as this month because people like to see what's happening month to month in their business. But officially, or if you want to do a perfect 12-month analysis, you'd probably analyze last month with the comparatives. But I'm going to keep it at this month because founders are in their P&L all the time and they want to see what's happening this month as well. But you just need to make sure your bookkeeping's up to date, right? So what we're going to do is compare with, enter a different number. We're going to compare with 11 periods here. I'm going to select that. So that gives us a full 12 months worth of data. Actually, you know what? I've changed my mind. Let's do last month because last month should be closed and it should be finalized. And then we're going to compare with 11 months. We're going to click on this little more button here. And on that, we're going to keep it as accrual, which is the right way to look at things for most accounting practices. We're going to remove the decimals. That is overwhelming. We don't need to look at what cents. Let's worry about the thousands. Let's not worry about the cents. So decimals are clicked off, but we want the total, definitely, which is awesome. And then if we update that, you can see it's comparing it back over time, which is fantastic. And you can see it's only got May, June, July data here. But once you fill it out properly for your business, if you've been going 12 months, you will have going back in time. So this is looking at, July, June, May, all the way back. And then we've got the year-to-date total here on the right. So every time you run this P&L, you can say, hey, awesome. We've got a total of, 6 million. Our trailing 12-month total is $6 million. And that gives you a really powerful way to look at your business. So that's the first step. Now what we're going to do is edit the layout here. Bottom left, click Edit Layout. And this is where we're going to sort things into buckets. So if I go to I'm going to put the profit and loss here on the left. And then I'm going to show you on the right the P&L that we're aiming for. So sales is revenue. That's one line. That's fine. Cost of sales, what we can do, cost of sales and purchases, we're just going to group that selection, call it cost of sales. Easy peasy. It's just one line there. But we've got gross profit here, which is awesome. But we need to add gross profit margin. So gross profit, what we're going to do here is rows. We're going to go formula and we're going to do GP percent, which is gross profit margin in my, accounting lingo. It's just a simple way to do it. We drag that up to under here and then you can see this is going to be, and gross profit, you can see on the formula here on the right, is just taking our gross margin dividing by revenue. So everything is common sizing. Just remember this. Everything is just as a percent of revenue, what is it taking up? And is it in balance? It's common sizing is super powerful. It knows if your business is in balance or not if it's expanded. If any area is expanded too much, it eats into your profit margin. So with that in mind, if we go back to here, gross profit is just going to be gross profit divided by trading income. And what I do is actually express it as a percent. So I do that divided by that times by 100, because otherwise you'll get a fraction, times by 100, bang. And that gives us the margin. So if I update the layout, and this is just the first update, we're going to go through a few. You can see GP percent. And because there's no cost of sales here, it's saying 100%. But once you have cost of sales in there, there will obviously be, that'll be lower. And ideally we want that at 90% for an agency, but obviously for e-com businesses, that can be a lot lower because you've got a lot higher product costs, shipping costs, all that stuff. Cool, that's the first thing you need to do. Now we're gonna go back into edit layout. So we're creating a custom report here. And we're gonna save it in Xero. Other income, you know what, for simplicity, let's just put other income up there for now. And that can be just called group selection, revenue. For more complex stuff, sometimes I put other income and expenses right down the bottom under operating, but in the interest of time, I'm just gonna keep it up here for now, keep it all simple. Now, operating expenses. This is where we're gonna group things. Actually, you know what? First we need to do direct labor. So then I grab superannuation and then wages and salaries. So these are the two key ones. So wages and salaries and super, boom, boom, boom. And I grab them and I drag them, I'm gonna group them first, group this selection, and I call them direct labor. Perfect. And then I'm gonna do is actually drag this up above operating expenses because you can see here, we've got our revenue, got our cost of sales, so we're up to here. Now we're gonna drag up the team costs in their own line. So direct labor is gonna sit here, and then we're gonna group that direct labor. It's just called, wages and super. And that's everyone who's being run through Xero payroll. Direct labor. Awesome. Now, officially in my actual, reports, if I just go to how I actually analyze things, I actually include one called contribution margin. Some people have another name for it. In agency world, some people call this AGI or agency gross income. I call it contribution margin as a bit of a tip of the hat to Greg Crabtree, who is a bit of an accounting expert, and that's what he calls it. And I've always loved how he thinks about things. So it's basically the cash left over you have to contribute to your overhead. So it's after your cost of sales is taken out and after your team is taken out, what do you have left? So we're going to call it contribution margin as well, but some people call it other names. So we need to go to rows, we're going to create a formula, and that's going to be underneath direct labor, and we're going to call it contribution margin. So you can do that as well. And then you just need to use this little formula thing, and we're going to take our gross profit and we're going to minus our direct labor to give us our contribution margin. So we're working our way down the P&L now. Revenue less cost of sales gives us gross profit. And you can see that formula here is just trading income minus cost of sales. So that's the number, the lower number now. We've taken off some costs. Now what we're doing is taking off direct labor from gross profit and getting the next lower number as we work our way down. So gross profit minus direct labor. And what we also want to do, some people like to have contribution margin as a percent. So when I'm doing deeper analysis, sometimes I look at contribution margin here on the right as a percent of revenue in my fancier analysis. But to simplify things, we don't need to for now. But the common sizing one that we do need to do is direct labor as a percent of revenue, because I think that is critical for everyone. So what I'll do is go to rows. I've got another formula. This one is going to sit under total direct labor, and I'm calling this direct labor percent of rev. And again, we're going to use that same kind of formula we use for gross profit. Actually, let's call it DL percent of rev, just to make it nice and clean. And then we're going to do that same kind of idea, right? We're going to do direct labor, going to divide it by trading income, and we're going to times it by 100. Times by 100. 100. Cool. DL percent of revenue, contribution margin. Let's update the layout. Oh, one invalid formula. So normally if there's an invalid formula, the net profit's out because we've played around with other income. So Xero's got some good inbuilt things where you can make sure that all the formulas work. So what we can do is delete other income, because you'll remember I already dragged and dropped it up into revenue just for simplicity. So we can actually update our net profit now as well. Our net profit is going to be not gross profit because we've created some additional formulas. Our net profit is actually going to be contribution margin minus operating expenses. And I'll talk you through why in a sec. Contribution margin minus operating expenses equals net profit. Cool, update. Awesome. So you can see we're now getting a more simplified and common sized P&L. We've got revenue, we've got our gross profit number. There's no cost of sales, so that's the same number. If we go a bit bigger. And then gross profit here is 100%. Then we've got our team costs, direct labor here, and then direct labor as a percent of revenue. And you can see in this demo company data, it's insane. We've got 13,400 wages, 3,995 revenue. So direct labor is taking up 96% of revenue, which is unsustainable and crazy, but that's just the demo company data. And that gives us our contribution margin here, and we barely have anything left over. So now you can see operating expenses is still split out into lots of different categories. And so we're going to simplify that and make that easier to read. So we're going to go back into edit layout. And if we have a look over here on the right, why we're doing this, start with the 8 mil, take away your cost of goods sold. So you're down to 6 mil here on the right. Then you take away your direct labor costs. It gives us a contribution margin, which we don't have in this example. And then from that number, we also take away the operating expenses. That gives us what's left over. And that's the same idea with common sizing is start with the revenue on the left, then you take away your COGS, take away your direct labor, take away your OPEX, and what's left over is your net profit. And so we're just using common sizing to make sure that if direct labor is taking up in this demo company 96% of revenue, we have no budget left for cost of sales, for overhead. So it's clearly out of balance. You want things to be in balance. So I'll quickly just do the rest of this, and then you can set up your own custom report at home. So for advertising, let's just create, sometimes there's, depending on the client, sometimes they have a bunch of different marketing costs or, client gifts, things like that. Anything to do with bringing in business, I group that selection as advertising. Actually, what's my official name for it in my actual, I call it marketing. Same diff, right? I'll put it as marketing just to be perfect. And we'll keep just advertising it in that for now. Cool. And then the next one you remember in our analysis is facilities. So anything in facilities here. So let's go to light power heating. Let's do rent, obviously. Repairs and maintenance on the building. Oh, sometimes the Xero report builder is a bit annoying. It you can't click heaps at once. Let's do telephone and internet, repairs and maintenance, rent, printing and stationery, freight and courier. We can call facilities cost, I guess, maybe. And then let's group that selection, facilities. And you got to make sure you debits and credits. So debit positive means it's an expense. Credit positive means it's a revenue item. So just keep an eye on, you don't want to put your expense lines as credit because otherwise they'll have the negative balance basically. So marketing, facilities, and then I'll just make sure there's no other facilities related stuff. Light power heating. Light power heating should be in facilities. You can drag and drop that. Drag and drop that up. Awesome. Office expenses, probably should put that in facilities. You can drag and drop it up, and I can expand it by clicking down, clicking up. But remember, we're putting them into simpler buckets, which is why we're doing that. Travel, unrealized, cool. So the rest, what I'm going to do, select all of it, group selection, and we're just going to call it other OPEX. That's the bucket for everything else. Boom. And so you can see in my more nuanced analysis here, for complex people, I also have a little section under here as other income / expense, which is where I might put depreciation and some of these things that aren't true operating expenses of the business. But for this simpler Xero example, I'm just going to dump it all into other OPEX in the interest of time. And so we'll put that there. So you just keep in mind, you can separate out some of these non-operating expenses stuff and put that underneath and create an operating profit formula, and then those things, and then net profit. But for this simplicity, I'm just going to do that. Operating expenses, other OPEX, total OPEX. And you know what I'm going to do now? I'm actually going to create another formula, rows formula, and drag that underneath. And this is OPEX percent of rev. Again, we're going to take our total operating expenses. We're going to divide it by our trading income. And this is giving you a deeper understanding of what's happening in your business. So you know from my little thing over here on the right, OPEX shouldn't take up more than 20% of revenue per our rules here. So, and then times it by 100 just to express it as a full percent rather than a fraction. And then we're also going to add one for net profit. Formula, net, NP, net margin as a percent. So net profit that everyone talks about is just common sizing. It's your profit divided by your revenue. So we're just using that same idea across the whole business, but we're simplifying your overhead into key categories. We're pulling out your labor as its own separate line and making sure we analyze that as a percent of revenue. And then obviously your cost of sales, things like that. Depending on the business, depending how complex it is, you know, the world's your oyster here. You can shuffle things around, but I'm just giving you a first starting point here. And I want you to do this for, hopefully you're following along at home, and you're going to have a much better analysis of your P&L using this format, this custom P&L, than just running a classic Xero P&L and taking what it gives you, because you're not really analyzing anything. So let's update that layout. All right, cool. I wish the demo company had more data for you so we could actually see all of the stuff going back, but you can start to see what we're doing here on the left. And if we zoom in a little bit, you can see we're now getting direct labor as a percent of revenue. We're now getting our contribution margin. We're having our operating expenses listed here in the key categories, marketing, facilities, other OPEX, which is the total OPEX. Then we're getting operating expenses percent of revenue. So you can see our OPEX as a percent of revenue is taking up 28% of revenue. So that 3.8 is taking up 28% of the 3.9K total. So that's out of balance. So direct labor is out of balance, 96%. That should be 50% or below. Operating expenses is out of balance. That's 28%. If we go back to our common sizing here on the right, that should be less than 20% of thing. And as a result, we've made a loss, a negative 24% profit. There's nothing left over. That profit margin has been eaten up by costs, and we're in a loss position. So that's, I think, gives you a lot better way to analyze the P&L. And ideally, you're looking at it on a trailing 12 months basis. So going out, and you'll have more data, obviously, in the real company. Going back in time, you can see how you're going on an annualized basis, you know, your total trading income for the past 12 months here in that total, which is really powerful. And the final step you need to do is save as custom, profit and loss. So I'll call this the trimline P&L. Trimline P&L. So we know it's trimline special. Let's move this back across. And then we can save. And I'll show you how to star this report as well. You save that custom report. So you can see under accounting, if we go to reports, and you go to custom, see these little tabs up here? Go to custom, go to trimline P&L, created just now, and star it. And that means when you click on your accounting menu, see that trimline P&L that's popped up there? You can go directly to it. So once your bookkeeper's done your bookkeeping, you can quickly go into here and see how you're shaping. And that's last month with 12. But if you want to have a look at it, you can just go to this month and press update. And that'll give you this month compared to the last 12 as well. If you want to get that August data in there as well, which is good to see. You can see this business is struggling. It's making a making a loss constantly. So there's some cost cutting that's coming up. And from this format, you can export it out and you can get these key categories, direct labor, OPEX, all those things, and you can start to graph it out. And as I showed you here in my actual dashboard, there it is. Gross margin, which is just that gross profit number there. Direct labor, which is just that direct labor number there. Operating expenses, which is just our total operating expenses number. And so it's simplifying the P&L so you can better understand it, so you can see the trends. And for example, if these total operating expenses are out of balance or direct labor is out of balance, you need to go in and analyze your headcount, or then you need to go in and do some cost cutting in the operating expenses. I've got actually more nuanced KPIs for those exact categories that I'll give you as a little bonus for watching this far. So here's my actual common sizing numbers that I look at month on month that might help you. So you see this common sizing stuff. So cost of sales should take up between 5 to 10%. Hopefully you can see that, 150. Cost of sales should take up between 5 to 10% of revenue, which basically means gross margin will be 80 to 90% of revenue. And this is for a service business, an agency, but for e-com, those metrics will be a little bit different. Direct labor, so all your team costs should make up 45. They shouldn't take up more than 65% of revenue. You can see in this little thing here, our team costs are taking up 64% of revenue, which is way too high. And that's causing the loss, a big part of the loss. So that's, it's hard to sustain it. You don't want to be above 50%. Marketing should be between 5 to 15% of revenue. So you can actually do deeper analysis and compare marketing divided by revenue to see what you're spending. But 0 to 7% spend is maintaining, 7 to 12% if you're in a growth phase, you want to invest more in marketing. 12% plus, you might be a startup just trying to scale and throwing all your cash into marketing. Facilities, so your rent, electricity, all that stuff shouldn't take up more than 5 to 8% of your revenue. And then your other OPEX, which is your other bucket, depending on what you're doing, shouldn't take up more than 5 to 10% of revenue. Sometimes it will temporarily, but shouldn't consistently. And management labor is the final thing I haven't spoken about. Sometimes we pull out the management team. We don't put them in direct labor. In this direct labor number, we split it out and treat management labor in operating expenses, like in overhead. But that's a story for another day. I don't want to overcomplicate things for you in this simple tutorial. Just start with common sizing. Just get an understanding of if you're in balance, and then start to export it and graph it out. And you can use fancy software tools if you need to, but honestly, once I've set this up for people, they understand the concept that direct labor percent needs to be below 50%. They don't even need to graph it. They understand it needs to be in balance. And once you've seen, once you've seen this, you can then export it out if you want and do this and have a look at a trend over time, because that's really powerful, seeing the trend lines. So that's the next step. All right, I'll leave it there for now. You've saved the custom report. Next time you go into Xero, you can go to accounting, trimline P&L, and you'll have your profit and loss with the simplified headings. You've got common sizing built in. You've got a total stretching back for 12 months. So, this month or last month compared with 11 periods gives you that analysis. So you can see how you're doing on a 12-month basis and also see how you're trending. So if you enjoyed it, feel free to subscribe, and I appreciate you watching. Cheers.